6 lashes. That's what it took for me to realize Liam was never a mate. He was a monster and he never loved me. He whipped me till I fainted, thinking I was nothing but a stray. He didn't know I was the Alpha King's sister. He didn't know my brother was watching. And he definitely didn't know that the wolf who would catch me when I fell was waiting just beyond the border.
Let's begin.
The ceremonial grounds of the Silver Creek Pack were bathed in the cold, silver light of the full moon. It was a night meant for celebration, for bonds, for new beginnings. For Marie, it was the night her life would be formally tethered to Liam, the beta of the pack. A union her brother Edward, the Alpha King, had assured her would solidify an important alliance. Marie stood in the center of the clearing, her back straight, her chin held high. Her simple white ceremonial gown did nothing to hide the fact that she was an outsider here. She was a wolf of the Royal Bloodline, raised in the grandeur of the king's palace, but tonight she wore no crown, no mark of her true station. Edward had insisted on secrecy. "We need to know his true character, Marie," he had said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "If he knows who you are, he'll be on his best behavior. I need to see the wolf he truly is." She had come as a lone wolf, a displaced omega from a fallen pack, a convenient mate for a powerful beta. The deception chafed against her pride, but she trusted Edward. He was not just her king, he was her older brother, her protector since their parents' death. If he deemed this necessary, she would endure it. Liam was handsome, she'd give him that. Tall, with dark hair and eyes that glittered with ambition. He stood across from her, the ceremonial whip, a tool meant to test the strength and resilience of a new mate, coiled in his hand. The pack elders chanted, their voices a low drone as the moon priestess anointed them both with sacred oils. "The bonding trial," the priestess intoned, her voice echoing in the silent clearing. "To prove the strength of the body, the resilience of the spirit, and the unwavering loyalty of the mate. Present your back, Omega." Turned slowly. She felt the eyes of the pack on her, hundreds of wolves, their gazes hungry for a show. She was to them a nobody, a stray their beta had graciously taken in. She could feel their condescension like a physical weight. The first lash came without warning. A sharp, searing line of fire across her shoulder blades. She didn't move. She had been trained by the royal guard since she could walk. A ceremonial whip was nothing. 1, she counted, her voice clear and steady. Protocol demanded she count to 10 without falling. The second strike was harder. He was testing her, she realized, seeing how much she could take. 2, Liam circled her. "You're stronger than you look, Stray," he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. "But I need a mate who can weather a storm, not a palace flower." He suspected something, or perhaps he simply enjoyed this. She'd heard whispers of his temper, his need for control. Edward had said to see his true character. She was seeing it now, painted on her back in welts of fire. The third lash knocked the breath from her lungs, but she held. 3. Then the fourth came, and with it a surge of his power. He was channeling his beta energy into the whip, making it more than leather and metal. It bit into her skin, tearing past the flesh. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, but she locked her knees, for Edward, for the plan. 4. A murmur went through the crowd. They were impressed. A lone wolf taking blows from a beta like a seasoned warrior, Liam's eyes darkened. Her resilience wasn't humbling him, it was angering him. He saw it as defiance. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he drew his arm back. "A stray should know her place," he snarled, his voice a public announcement now. "You will submit." The fifth lash was brutal. It was not a test, it was a punishment. The barbed tip of the ceremonial whip wrapped around her side, tearing the white gown and the flesh beneath. She stumbled, catching herself on her hands and knees. Pain, white-hot and consuming, radiated through her. She could feel her wolf surging within her, a roar of fury demanding release. She wanted to shift, to show him the monstrous alpha wolf she truly was, the sister of the king. But she couldn't, not yet. 5, she hissed through clenched teeth, pushing herself back to her feet. Blood began to seep through the torn back of her dress, a stark crimson against the white. The crowd was silent now. Some wolves shifted uncomfortably. They knew that was beyond a test. That was cruelty. Liam, however, was lost in the power of it. He saw her rising again as a direct challenge to his authority. His face twisted into a mask of rage. "Stay, down!" Didn't wait for her to turn. He didn't follow the ritual. The sixth strike was a full-powered swing, aimed to cripple. It caught her across the back of her thighs and lower back, the energy behind it cracking like thunder. Marie's vision went white. Her body, for all her training, was not invincible. The delicate bones in her lower back protested with a sickening pop. Her legs gave out completely. She hit the cold ground, her cheek pressing into the damp earth. Her body was screaming, but a deeper, more primal sound was building in her chest. A growl of pure, unadulterated royal fury. It was a sound that was in her blood, a command frequency that no wolf could ignore. The pack heard it. They didn't understand what it was, but their wolves cowered. Even the elders took a step back. Liam, standing over her with the whip raised for a seventh strike, faltered for a moment. Confusion replaced the rage in his eyes. He looked at the crumpled figure at his feet, then around at his pack's sudden fear. What? That's when the air itself seemed to splinter. A presence, immense and absolute, descended upon the clearing. It was the weight of a mountain, the power of a raging sea. Every wolf in Silver Creek, including Liam, was forced to their knees by the sheer, uncompromising aura of an alpha king. Liam's arm, still holding the whip, trembled violently as the command washed over him, forcing his hand down. The pack parted, wolves scrambling to bow low as a man strode into the center of the ceremonial ground. He was tall, broader than Liam, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes of piercing, frozen blue. He wore a simple black tunic and trousers, but upon his head sat a simple silver circlet, the only crown the Alpha King ever needed. It was Edward. He didn't even glance at Liam. His gaze was fixed solely on the bloodied figure of his sister, trying to push herself up from the dirt. In 2 strides, he was beside her, shrugging off his heavy cloak. He knelt, ignoring the mud and her blood that stained his clothes, and gently, so gently, wrapped the cloak around her trembling shoulders. "Marie," he said, his voice, which had been an iron fist over the pack, now soft with a brother's anguish. "I'm here. It's over." She looked up at him, her face pale, her lips bloodied from biting them to keep from crying out. A single tear of relief, not pain, traced a path through the dirt on her cheek. "You took your time," she whispered, a ghost of her usual fire in her weak voice. Edward's jaw clenched. He helped her to her feet, keeping an arm securely around her waist as she swayed. Only then did he turn his terrifying gaze to the man still kneeling on the ground, the ceremonial whip lying useless beside him. Liam's face was ashen, his earlier arrogance shattered into a million pieces as the truth slammed into him. "You whipped her," Edward said, his voice low and deadly, carrying to every ear in the silent pack. "You whipped my sister, the princess of the realm, until she bled, until she fell." Let the words hang in the air, watching the horror dawn on Liam's face, watching it spread through the pack like wildfire. Edward's eyes, cold as the deepest winter, never left Liam. A cruel, predatory smile touched his lips, but there was no warmth in it, only the promise of an end. "Now," the Alpha King said, gently guiding Marie to sit on a nearby ceremonial stone. He looked down at the beta who was supposed to be his brother-in-law. "Now, Beta Liam, we're going to have a very long conversation about the meaning of the word submission." The ceremonial ground had transformed from a place of celebration to a stage of reckoning. Marie sat on the cold stone, Edward's cloak wrapped around her like a shield. The warmth of it seeped into her battered body, but she refused to lean back against the altar. The wounds on her back screamed with every shallow breath, but she would not show weakness. Not now. Not in front of these wolves who had watched her bleed like it was entertainment. Edward stood before Liam, who remained on his knees. The beta's face had drained of all color, his earlier arrogance replaced by the primal terror of a wolf who suddenly understood he had stepped into a trap far larger than himself. "Your Majesty," Liam stammered, his voice cracking. I wasn't told she came as a stray," Edward finished for him, his voice silk over steel. "A lone omega from a fallen pack. Yes, I know what she came as because I sent her here." A collective gasp rippled through the pack. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Marie watched the faces in the crowd, shock, fear, and dawning horror as they realized what their beta had done to the sister of the Alpha King. Liam's hands, still trembling, pressed flat against the ground. "Please, I was following the ritual, the bonding trial." "The bonding trial requires 10 strikes of ceremonial measure." Edward cut him off, his voice rising. "You struck her 6 times. You used your beta power. You aimed for her spine. You did not stop when she fell." He took a step closer, and Liam flinched. "That is not a trial, that is butchery." Marie watched her brother's control. Edward was a volcano barely contained. She had seen him angry before, had been on the receiving end of his protective fury more than once, but this was different. This was the Alpha King standing in judgment. "Edward," she said quietly. His head turned toward her instantly, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. "You should not be speaking, you need a healer." I need you to listen. She gripped the edge of the stone, forcing herself upright despite the fire tearing through her back. The plan was yours, the secrecy was yours, you wanted to see his true character. Her voice was steady, though each word cost her. You have seen it, now act accordingly, but do not let rage cloud your judgment. You are not just my brother right now, you are the king. The words hit him like cold water. She saw the shift in his eyes, the wild fury receding, replaced by the cold, calculating precision of a ruler. He gave her a single, sharp nod before turning back to the crowd. Silver Creek, Edward announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the territory. Your beta has committed an offense against the Royal Bloodline. The punishment for such an act is death. Liam's head snapped up, his wolf surging forward in desperation. No, please, I didn't know. You cannot kill me for ignorance. Ignorance? Edward's laugh was hollow. You struck a defenseless woman until she bled. You mocked her as a stray. You called for her submission. He crouched down, bringing himself level with Liam's terrified face. Tell me, Beta, if she had been a stray Omega from a fallen pack, would that have made what you did acceptable? The silence was deafening. Liam opened his mouth, but no words came. There was no defense. They both knew the truth. Liam hadn't whipped her because the ritual demanded it. He had whipped her because he could, because she was beneath him, because she had no pack to protect her. Marie saw the exact moment Liam realized he had condemned himself. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained from his body. He was a wolf who had finally understood that the hunter had become the prey. Death, Edward repeated, rising to his full height. But not tonight. He looked around the clearing, his gaze sweeping over the kneeling pack. Tonight you will kneel. Tomorrow you will explain to your alpha, to your pack, exactly what you did. And then, he let the silence stretch. Then I will decide if mercy is something you deserve. He turned his back on Liam as if the beta were already nothing, a piece of refuse to be dealt with later. His focus shifted entirely to Marie. Can you walk? He asked quietly, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers cold against his warmth. I have to. No, he shook his head. You don't have to do anything, not anymore. And before she could protest, he lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Marie wanted to argue. She was a princess, a warrior, not a child to be carried, but her body betrayed her. The moment she was cradled against his chest, the adrenaline that had kept her upright began to fade. The world swam at the edges, sounds becoming muffled, lights blurring. Healer, Edward commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Now. Last thing Marie saw before consciousness slipped away was her brother's face. The face of the Alpha King, hard and unforgiving. And beneath it, the face of her brother, terrified he had almost lost her. She woke in a room that smelled of herbs and moonlight. A soft bed cradled her aching body. Someone had removed the ruined ceremonial gown and dressed her in a loose cotton shift. The wounds on her back had been cleaned and bandaged, the sharp sting of healing salve cooling her ravaged skin. You're awake. She turned her head carefully. Edward sat in a chair beside the bed, his circlet removed, his golden hair disheveled. He looked exhausted and furious. The two expressions warred on his face as he watched her. Long, she asked, her voice rough. 6 hours. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The healer says you'll heal, but there may be scarring. The beta's power, it complicates things. Let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Scarring, of course. Another mark to add to her collection. She was alive. She was whole. You almost died, Edward said, his voice cracking slightly. Marie, you almost, but I didn't. She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. You came. I should have come sooner. His jaw tightened. I should have stopped it after the first strike. I should never have. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. This was my fault. The secrecy, the plan. I put you in harm's way. No, she squeezed his hand, ignoring the pain the movement caused. Liam put me in harm's way. He made his choices. You gave him the rope, Edward, but he chose to hang himself with it. He could have killed you, but he didn't. She met his eyes, willing him to understand. I am not a fragile thing, brother. I have survived worse. Edward's expression flickered, something dark passing behind his eyes. You shouldn't have to survive anything. That's the point. You're my sister, my blood. You should be protected, not used as bait to test the character of ambitious wolves. Marie was quiet for a moment. She understood his guilt. She had felt it herself, lying in the dirt, waiting for him to arrive. But she also understood something else, something that had crystallized in her chest the moment Edward's presence had shattered the clearing. I am not your weakness, Edward, she said softly. And you are not mine. What Liam did tonight, she paused, finding the words. It showed me something. It showed me that I cannot hide behind you forever. That I cannot come to PAX as a nameless wolf and expect them to see my worth. You have nothing to prove, don't I? She shifted, trying to sit up. Edward moved to help her, propping pillows behind her back despite her hiss of pain. I am the Alpha King's sister. That title means nothing if I cannot stand on my own. Tonight I stood. I took 6 lashes from a beta and I did not break. Not because I am your sister, because I am me. Edward stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was a tired smile, a relieved smile, but it was genuine. You sound like father, he said quietly. The mention of their father, the old Alpha King, dead these 10 years, sent a pang through her chest. But it was a good pain, a remembered warmth. He would have been proud of you tonight, Edward continued. And he would have killed Liam himself for touching you. Managed a small laugh, though it pulled at her wounds. He would have done it slower than you, I think. Father always did enjoy a dramatic execution. Lightness faded as a knock came at the door. Edward's expression hardened instantly, the king returning to his features. Enter. Door opened to reveal a woman Marie hadn't met before, a tall, severe-looking wolf with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes. She wore the silver pendant of Silver Creek's head elder. King, the woman said, bowing low. I am Elder Morwen. I come on behalf of Silver Creek. Edward rose, positioning himself between Marie and the door. Speak. Morwen's gaze flickered to Marie, something unreadable in her expression. We have confined Beta Liam to the holding cells. Alpha Robert requests an audience with you at first light. He wishes to discuss. She hesitated. The matter of his Beta's fate is nothing to discuss, Edward said coldly. Liam's fate is mine to decide. He committed treason against the crown. With respect, your majesty, Morwen said carefully. He did not know the woman was of royal blood. The deception was my design. Edward's voice dropped to a dangerous register. Are you suggesting that your Beta's actions would have been acceptable had my sister been a common wolf? Morwen's face paled. No, of course not. I only meant... You meant to protect your pack. I understand. Edward's tone softened almost imperceptibly. But Liam's cruelty was not born of ignorance, Elder. It was born of character, and character is not a matter of circumstance. It is a matter of the soul. The Elder bowed her head. What would you have us do? Edward glanced back at Marie. She saw the question in his eyes. What do you want? Thought about it, about the whip, about the cold ground, about the way Liam had looked at her like she was nothing. I want to see him, she said quietly. Both Edward and Morwen looked at her with surprise. Marie, Edward started. I want to see him, she repeated, her voice stronger. Before you decide anything, I want to look him in the eyes and ask him a question. Edward studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Tomorrow, after I speak with Alpha Robert, but you will not go alone. And you will not go without a healer's approval. Was a compromise. She would take it. Rest now, Edward said, turning back to Morwen. Tell Alpha Robert I will meet with him at dawn, and tell him to pray that his Beta's fate does not become his pack's. Bowed and retreated, closing the door behind her. Edward moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds of Silver Creek. I should burn this pack to the ground for what they allowed. Won't. Marie settled back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at her. You're a better king than that. Am I? He didn't turn around. Because right now I don't feel like a king. I feel like a brother who almost failed the one person he swore to protect. Marie closed her eyes, the weight of the day finally pulling her under. You didn't fail me, Edward. You never have. She paused, her voice growing softer. Now stop brooding at my window and let me sleep. I have a Beta to confront in the morning. She heard him chuckle, a quiet, reluctant sound. Rest, little sister, he said, his voice gentle now. I'll be here when you wake. Wrapped in the warmth of his presence, surrounded by the scent of herbs and the distant howl of wolves, Marie let herself drift into a dreamless sleep. Tomorrow there would be justice. Tomorrow she would face the wolf who had tried to break her, and she would show him exactly what kind of stray she truly was. The holding cells of Silver Creek were carved into the bedrock beneath the pack house, a place of cold stone and older secrets. Morning light never reached these depths. Instead, torches flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Marie descended the spiral staircase with measured steps, her hand resting lightly on the stone wall for balance. The healer had done her work well. The wounds on Marie's back had begun to knit, though the deeper cuts still throbbed with every movement. She had refused the pain elixir. She needed her mind clear for what was to come. Edward walked beside her, his presence a wall of silent fury. Behind them, Alpha Robert, a graying wolf with the weary eyes of a leader who had failed his pack, followed at a respectful distance. He had spent the morning begging Edward's forgiveness. explaining that Liam had always been ambitious, always hot-tempered, but never this. Never so cruel. Edward had listened to none of it. Marie knew her brother well enough to understand that Alpha Robert's pleas had only hardened his resolve. A leader who did not know his beta's true nature was a leader who had stopped watching. And a leader who stopped watching was a leader who would soon fall. "Cell at the end," Alpha Robert said quietly as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "We've kept him isolated. He's asked to speak with you, with both of you." Marie said nothing. She walked past the empty cells, storage rooms now, used for pack supplies, until she reached the heavy iron door at the end of the corridor. A single torch burned beside it, illuminating the small window cut into the metal. Through it, she could see Liam. He sat on a stone bench, his back against the wall, his beta finery traded for simple gray prison clothes. His dark hair was disheveled, his jaw shadowed with stubble. He looked smaller than he had last night, diminished. A wolf who had been stripped of his power and left with nothing but his own thoughts. He looked up as the lock turned, and Marie saw the flicker of something in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or desperation. It died the moment he saw Edward beside her. Edward signaled to Alpha Robert, who unlocked the door and stepped back. "I'll be outside," the Alpha muttered, retreating down the corridor. He did not meet Marie's eyes. Edward pushed the door open, gesturing for Marie to enter first. She stepped into the cell, the door closing behind them with a heavy clang. Liam rose slowly, his hands at his sides, his posture carefully submissive. His gaze dropped to the floor. "Your Majesty, Princess." Marie studied him, the man who had whipped her. The man who had called her astray and commanded her to submit. He looked like a different person now, humbled, broken even. But she remembered the look in his eyes last night, the pleasure he had taken in her pain. That was not the face of a man who had simply made a mistake. That was the face of a man who believed cruelty was his right. "You wanted to speak with me," Marie said, her voice even. "Speak." Liam's throat worked as he swallowed. "I was wrong." The words came out rough, scraped raw. "I was arrogant, I was cruel, I saw only what I wanted to see, and I acted without honor." Edward made a sound low in his throat, a warning growl that vibrated through the small cell. "You acted like a coward. You struck a woman half your size, bound by ritual to stand still, and you called it strength." Liam flinched. Yes, I did, and there is no excuse for it. I saw her silence as defiance, her strength as a challenge. I wanted to break her because she would not bend, and I called that pride when it was only my own weakness I could not bear to see." Marie listened. The words were pretty, polished, even, as if he had rehearsed them in the long hours of the night, waiting for this moment. "You would have killed her," Edward said, taking a step forward. "If I had not arrived when I did, you would have kept striking until she stopped moving, and you would have called it a ritual accident." Liam's head snapped up, terror flashing in his eyes. "No, I don't know what I would have done. The power, the ceremony, the eyes of the pack, I lost myself. I became something I am not. Something you are not." Marie's voice cut through his plea like a blade. "Or something you finally had permission to be." The question hung in the air between them. Liam stared at her, and she saw the mask of repentance flicker, just for a moment, before he composed himself. "Princess," he said, his voice careful now, measured. "I understand your anger, your hatred. I would feel the same were our positions reversed. But I am begging you, let me prove that I am more than my worst moment. Let me show you the wolf I could be, not the wolf I was last night." Marie moved closer. Her back ached with every step, but she did not let it show. She stopped a foot away from him, close enough to see the pulse racing in his throat, the fine tremor in his hands. "Have a question for you," she said quietly. "One question. And I want the truth." Liam nodded quickly. "Anything. When you struck me the 5th time, when I fell to my hands and knees, when the blood began to show, what did you feel?" He hesitated. She watched the calculation behind his eyes, the desperate search for the answer that would save his life. "Shame," he said finally. "I felt shame." "Liar." The word came from Edward, but Marie held up her hand, silencing her brother. She had not moved her gaze from Liam's face. "Try again," she said softly. "And remember, I am not a judge. I am the woman whose blood is still drying on the ceremonial ground. I know what I saw in your eyes. Tell me the truth, or I walk out of this cell and my brother does what he came here to do." Liam's mask cracked. She saw it, the moment the performance fell away, leaving something raw and ugly beneath. His jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "Power," he said, the word ripped from him. "I felt power. For the first time in my life, I had something that no one could take from me. I had you, a wolf who would not bow, who would not break, and I had the right to make you suffer. And it felt—" He stopped, his voice catching. "It felt like I was finally the one in control." Silence that followed was absolute. Even the torches seemed to dim. Marie let his words settle in her chest. She had expected them, had known somehow what he would say. But hearing the truth of his cruelty laid bare, was something else entirely. "You enjoyed it," she said. Not a question. Liam's hands unclenched, then clenched again. "Yes. If I were truly a stray omega from a fallen pack, if I had no brother to come for me, would you feel any remorse now?" His eyes met hers. For a moment, she saw something there that might have been honesty, or might have been the last desperate play of a wolf who had run out of lies. "I would feel nothing," he admitted. "Because she would have been nothing. To me, to this pack, to anyone." Marie nodded slowly. She turned away from him, walking toward the door where Edward waited. Her brother's face was a mask of cold fury, but she saw the question in his eyes. She stopped at the threshold, her hand on the iron door, and looked back at Liam. "You told me last night that a stray should know her place," she said. "I am not a stray, Liam. I am the daughter of the Alpha King who united these lands, the sister of the wolf who sits on the throne of every pack you will ever know. And I am the woman who stood in the dirt, bleeding from your whip, and did not break." She met his eyes one last time. "But you are right about one thing. A wolf must know their place. And yours, Beta Liam, is not at my side. It is not in this pack. It is not anywhere that free wolves gather and call themselves honorable." She stepped through the door, and Edward followed, pulling it shut behind him. Alpha Robert waited in the corridor, his face pale. He had heard everything. The cells carried sound too well for secrets to survive. "Your Majesty," Robert began, "I know what he did, I know what he admitted, but he is my beta, my pack. Let me handle his punishment. Let me restore the honor of Silver Creek." Edward looked at Marie. "This is not my decision alone. She is the one he wronged." Marie considered. She thought about the whip, the blood, the cold ground. She thought about Liam's face when he admitted the truth, the naked hunger for power that had driven him. "His life is not mine to take," she said finally. "I am not an executioner, but his place in this pack, his place in any pack, is forfeit." Robert nodded slowly. "Exile." "Exile," Edward confirmed. "He will leave Silver Creek by nightfall. He will take nothing with him, and if he is ever found within the borders of any pack that answers to the throne." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. "It will be done," Robert said, bowing his head. Marie walked past him, her steps slow but steady. She had gotten what she came for, the truth, and the truth she was learning was both heavier and lighter than she had expected. Edward caught up with her at the base of the stairs. "You're satisfied?" She looked up at the narrow spiral staircase, at the sliver of daylight visible at the top. "I'm alive, he's exposed, the truth is known." She paused. "Satisfied is a strong word, but I will be." He studied her face for a long moment. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for." "I'm stronger than you give anyone credit for, brother. You forget I was raised in your shadow. I learned to stand long before you taught me to fight." Edward's lips quirked in a reluctant smile. "Father always said you were the stubborn one." "Father said I was the smart one. You just heard what you wanted to hear." For a moment, they were not Alpha King and Princess. They were simply siblings, standing in the dark, finding their way back to each other. Then Edward's expression sobered. "There's more we need to discuss. What happened here, it changes things. The secrecy, the deception, it served its purpose, but it nearly cost you everything. I won't risk you again." Marie climbed the first step, her muscles protesting. "What are you saying?" "Saying that when we leave Silver Creek, things will be different. You will not hide anymore. You will not come to packs as a nameless wolf, subject to their judgment. You are Marie of the Royal Bloodline, and the world will know it." She stopped, looking back at him. "That will change how they see me." Edward's voice was firm. "It will, but it will also protect you. And after last night, I will accept nothing less." Marie thought about it. The weight of her brother's protection, the weight of her own identity. She had spent so long hiding, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself. But perhaps the moment had found her instead. "Then I suppose," she said slowly, "that we should start as we mean to go on." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" She began to climb again, her voice echoing in the stone stairwell. "Meaning that when we walk out of this pack tonight, I will not be the wounded princess limping away from a failed mating. I will be Marie of the Royal Bloodline, and I will leave with my head held high." "What about Liam?" Edward asked, following her up. "Are you truly content to let him walk free? Exiled but alive?" Marie reached the top of the stairs, stepping out into the morning light. She blinked against the brightness, feeling the warmth on her face. Her back still ached. Her body still remembered every strike of the whip. But she was standing. She was breathing. She was here. "Liam is a wolf who thought power was something you take from others," she said quietly. He will learn in exile what it means to have nothing, no pack, no status. No one to bow to him. She turned to face her brother, the sun catching in her dark hair. That is a punishment I can live with. Edward studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or recognition, the acknowledgement of a wolf who had found her own strength. Then we leave at dusk, he said. Back to the capital, back to where you belong. Marie nodded, looking out over the territory of Silver Creek. A pack was waking around them, wolves going about their morning routines, pretending the events of the night before had not shaken the foundations of their world. They would remember this day, she knew. They would remember the stray who became a princess, the beta who fell from grace, the alpha king who came for his sister and left a pack changed. Back to where I belong, she repeated, testing the words. And for the first time since she had arrived at Silver Creek, they did not feel like a cage. They felt like a beginning. The journey back to the capital took 3 days. Edward had arranged for a royal carriage to meet them at the edge of Silver Creek territory. A sleek, black conveyance drawn by 4 matching gray stallions, the crest of the royal house emblazoned on its doors. It was a statement, Marie knew. A declaration to every pack they passed that the Alpha King traveled with his sister, and she was not to be forgotten again. Marie spent most of the first day sleeping, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been fighting since the ceremony. The healer had given her a salve that numbed the wounds on her back, and Edward had insisted on the softest cushions, the smoothest roads, the slowest pace. She would have protested, but the gentle sway of the carriage and the rhythmic beat of the horse's hooves pulled her under again and again. On the second day, she woke feeling more like herself. The pain in her back had dulled to a persistent ache, manageable enough that she could sit upright without wincing. She spent the morning watching the landscape change from the dense forests of Silver Creek to the rolling hills of the Central Territories. By afternoon, they had crossed into lands she recognized, packs that flew banners bearing the royal crest, territories where her family's name meant safety. We'll stop at Dawnshadow for the night, Edward announced as the sun began its descent. Alpha Marcus has offered his guest house. He was distressed to hear what happened at Silver Creek. Marie raised an eyebrow. Distressed or eager to curry favor with the king who nearly destroyed a pack for touching his sister. Edward's lips twitched. Both, but Marcus is an old friend of father's. He's known us since we were pups. He'll want to see you to make sure you're whole. She didn't argue. The thought of a real bed, a hot meal, and walls that weren't constantly moving was appealing. And Dawnshadow. She remembered Dawnshadow. Summers spent running through fields of wildflowers, learning to hunt in forests that smelled of pine and promise. It had been years since she had visited. The carriage rolled through the gates of Dawnshadow as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Alpha Marcus waited at the entrance to the pack house, a tall, broad-shouldered wolf with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He was flanked by 2 younger wolves, a woman Marie recognized as his daughter, Alina, and a man she did not know. Edward stepped out first, and Marcus clasped his forearm in the old way, the greeting of warriors who had fought side by side. "Edward, you're welcome here as always." Marcus. Edward's voice was warm, the formal edge it had carried at Silver Creek fatting. "Thank you for opening your home to us." Marcus's gaze shifted to the carriage door, and Marie descended, slowly, carefully, but with her head held high. She had chosen her clothing carefully, a deep blue traveling dress that marked her as nobility, her dark hair braided back from her face. She wore no crown, but she carried herself like a queen. Marcus's expression softened the moment he saw her. "Little Marie." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. "Look at you. All grown, and stronger than any wolf has a right to be, from what I hear." She smiled, the expression genuine despite the ache in her back. "It's good to see you, Marcus. It's been too long." Too long. He studied her face, his eyes sharp despite their warmth. "You have your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn chin." He glanced at Edward. "This one was always the brooder. You got the fire." Marie laughed, the sound surprising her. It was the first time she had laughed since Silver Creek, and it felt like something unlocking in her chest. "This is my daughter, Alina," Marcus continued, gesturing to the woman beside him. "And my beta's son, Alexander. He's been helping with the Eastern patrols. You'll remember the rogue troubles we've been having." Alexander stepped forward, and Marie found herself looking at a wolf she did not recognize. He was tall, almost as tall as Edward, with hair the color of dark honey and eyes that shifted between green and gold in the fatting light. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but there was something warm in his expression, something that softened the hard lines of his jaw. He moved with the easy grace of a wolf who was comfortable in his own skin, and when he bowed to her, the gesture was respectful without being obsequious. "Princess Marie," he said, his voice low and pleasant. "It's an honor to meet you. I've heard much about your family." Marie inclined her head. "The honor is mine, Alexander. Though I confess I don't remember your father from my visits here." "You wouldn't," Alexander said, straightening. "My family served a different territory until 5 years ago. We pledged to Dawnshadow after the border skirmishes in the east." His eyes met hers, and there was something in them, an intensity, a focus, that made her breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with her wounds. "I was away, training with the border patrols when you last visited. I've regretted missing the chance to meet you." There was nothing improper in his words, nothing beyond polite conversation. But Marie felt something shift in her chest, a flutter, a warmth, a spark of something she had not felt in a very long time. She pushed it away. She was here to heal, not to be distracted by handsome wolves with kind eyes and honey-colored hair. "The guest house is prepared," Alina interjected, her voice bright and welcoming. She looped her arm through Marie's with a familiarity that should have felt presumptuous but somehow didn't. "I've had the healer prepare a draft for your back, and the cook has been working on the lamb stew you used to love. Do you still hate turnips? I remember you used to hide them under the table when father wasn't looking." Marie blinked. "You remember that?" Alina grinned. "I was under the table with you. We were partners in crime, Marie. Don't tell me you forgot." And suddenly, Marie did remember. Alina, with her wild curls and endless laughter, teaching Marie to climb trees, to skip stones across the river, to steal honey from the kitchens and blame it on the forest spirits. They had been inseparable for 3 summers, 2 girls who didn't yet understand the weight of the titles they would one day carry. "Alina." Marie's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't recognize you. You've changed so much." "Both have." Alina's smile softened. "But some things don't change. Come, let's get you settled." She led Marie toward the guest house, chattering about the pack, about the changes in Dawnshadow, about the pups she was training and the hunts she had led. Marie listened, letting the words wash over her, letting herself be pulled into a world that had nothing to do with whips and ceremonies and wolves who wanted to break her. Behind her, she heard Edward and Marcus talking, their voices low and serious. And somewhere in that conversation, she heard Alexander's voice as well, calm, measured, asking questions that showed he was listening, that he cared about the answers. She did not look back. But she felt his gaze on her, a warmth against her skin, and she knew that whatever else happened at Dawnshadow, she would not forget the way his eyes had held hers in the twilight. The guest house was small but elegant, a single-story building of pale stone with a thatched roof and windows that opened onto a garden filled with night-blooming flowers. Alina showed Marie to the main bedroom, where a fire crackled in the hearth and fresh linens had been laid on the bed. "Healer will come by in the morning to check your wounds," Alina said, helping Marie out of her traveling dress. "But the draft should help you sleep tonight." Marie nodded, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the healing cuts on her back. "I didn't expect," she stopped, unsure how to phrase it, "that I would remember." Alina's voice was gentle. "Marie, you were my closest friend. I never forgot you, when I heard what happened at Silver Creek." She shook her head, her expression darkening. "Edward had to be restrained, when Marcus got the first report. He wanted to go to Silver Creek himself, tear Liam apart with his bare hands. We had to remind him that the Alpha King would handle it." Marie sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion pulling at her. "It was not what I expected. No one expects cruelty from a wolf who is supposed to protect them." Alina knelt beside her, taking her hands. "But you survived, and you're here now. And I promise you, whatever you need, whatever you want, we will make it happen." Marie looked at her old friend, at the fierce loyalty in her eyes, and felt something loosen in her chest. She had been so focused on the danger, on the betrayal, on the weight of her own survival. She had forgotten that there were wolves who would fight for her, not because she was the Alpha King's sister, but because she was Marie. "Thank you," she said quietly. Alina squeezed her hands and stood. "Rest now. Dinner will be ready in a few hours, but there's no pressure to come if you're not up to it. I can bring a tray." Marie straightened, some of her old stubbornness returning. "I've spent enough time hiding. I'll be there." Alina smiled. "That's the Marie I remember." She moved to the door, then paused, glancing back. "Alexander will be there too, He asked about you 3 times while you were getting settled." Marie felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was being polite, was being interested. Lena's grin turned mischievous. I've known Alexander for 5 years. I've never seen him ask about anyone 3 times in one conversation. She slipped out the door before Marie could respond, her laughter echoing in the hallway. Marie sat in the quiet room, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart, and tried to tell herself it was nothing. A reaction to the stress, to the exhaustion, to the strange relief of being somewhere safe. But she knew better. She had felt it the moment their eyes met. A pull, a recognition, a spark that she had only ever heard described in stories. The bond, wolves called it. The mating bond. The thing that poets wrote about and warriors fought for and wolves spent their whole lives searching for. It was impossible. She had just escaped a mating ceremony that had nearly killed her. She was wounded, vulnerable, in no state to be thinking about bonds or mates or any of it. And yet, she thought of honey-colored hair and eyes that shifted between green and gold. She thought of a voice that was warm and steady, a presence that felt like shelter. She thought of the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with ambition, not with the cold calculation of a wolf who saw her as a prize to be won. He had looked at her like she was worth seeing. Marie lay back on the bed, careful not to press against her wounds, and stared at the ceiling. Not now, she told herself. Not yet. You are not ready for this. But her heart, stubborn and hopeful and entirely unwilling to listen to reason, had already made up its mind. Dinner was held in the great hall of Dawnshadow, a long room of dark wood and ancient stone, the walls hung with tapestries depicting the pack's history. Marie arrived on Edward's arm, wearing a dress of deep emerald that Alina had somehow produced from her own wardrobe. It was simpler than what she would have worn at the capital, but it suited her, made her feel grounded, real, like a wolf rather than a symbol. Marcus greeted her with a warm embrace, careful of her back. Alina pulled out a chair for her at the high table, positioning her between herself and Edward. And Alexander sat across from her, his eyes finding hers the moment she entered the room. The meal was a blur of conversation and laughter, of stories told and memories shared. Marie found herself laughing more than she had in months, caught up in the warmth of the pack, the easy camaraderie of wolves who had known each other for years. But through it all, she was aware of Alexander. The way he laughed at her jokes, the way he leaned forward when she spoke, as if her words mattered more than anything else in the room. The way his hand brushed against hers when they both reached for the bread at the same time, an accidental touch that sent electricity racing up her arm. She pulled back quickly, her face heating, and he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Forgive me," he said quietly, for her ears only. "I didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't." The words came out too fast, too breathless. She forced herself to meet his eyes. It's nothing." He studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her, past the polite words and the carefully composed expression to the chaos beneath. "Been through something terrible," he said, his voice low. "If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I can—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened it with a small smile. "Your presence is not the problem." He tilted his head, something flickering in his eyes. "Then what is?" She opened her mouth to answer, to deflect, to say something safe and meaningless, but the words that came out surprised her. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I came to Dawnshadow to heal, to rest, to figure out what comes next. I wasn't expecting." She gestured vaguely at him, at the hall, at everything. Understanding dawned in his expression. "You weren't expecting to feel anything." "I wasn't expecting to feel this." She held his gaze, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "Whatever this is." A long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the feast faded, the laughter and music becoming distant, unimportant. There was only this, the space between them, the pull she couldn't explain, the quiet certainty that something had shifted, something had begun. Alexander reached across the table, his fingers brushing against her wrist. "Then perhaps," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "we figure it out together." Marie's heart stopped. Then it started again, faster than before, pounding against her ribs like a wolf trying to escape. She should pull away. She should laugh it off, change the subject, retreat to the safety of her room and her wounds and the careful walls she had built around herself. But she didn't want to. She turned her hand, letting her fingers curl around his, and felt the world tilt on its axis. "Together," she repeated, testing the word. It felt strange on her tongue. It felt like a promise. Across the table, Alexander smiled. A real smile, warm and unguarded. And Marie felt something she had thought was lost forever begin to bloom in her chest. Hope. The days at Dawnshadow settled into a rhythm that Marie had not realized she craved. She woke each morning to sunlight filtering through the garden windows, the scent of night-blooming flowers replaced by the crisp freshness of dawn. Alina would arrive with breakfast, fresh bread, honey, strong tea, and they would sit together in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. The healer would come to check her wounds, applying salves that smelled of lavender and rosemary, pronouncing each day that the scars were healing clean. And Alexander would find reasons to be near her. It was subtle at first. A walk through the pack territory that happened to cross her path. An invitation to join the morning training session because Edward mentioned you were trained by the Royal Guard, and I'd love to see your form. A seat beside her at meals that somehow became permanent, as if it had always been there. Marie told herself it was coincidence. She told herself she was reading too much into things. She told herself that the flutter in her chest every time he smiled at her was simply the relief of being somewhere safe, among wolves who treated her as a person rather than a symbol. She told herself many things, but when she lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, she could not deny the truth that pulsed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. The bond was there, growing, demanding to be acknowledged. On the fourth morning, Alina found her in the garden before breakfast, sitting on a stone bench with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. Thinking about him, Alina said, settling beside her without waiting for an invitation. Marie didn't pretend to misunderstand. I'm thinking about a lot of things. You're thinking about Alexander, about the bond, about whether you're ready for any of it. Alina's voice was matter of fact, without judgment. I've known you since we were children, Marie. You've never been good at hiding from me. Marie let out a breath, some of the tension in her shoulders releasing. Is it that obvious? To me, yes. To him. Alina smiled, a knowing curve of her lips. He asked me this morning if I thought you might like to see the eastern fields. Apparently, they're particularly beautiful this time of year. He's been trying to find an excuse to be alone with you for 3 days. Marie's heart stuttered. Why didn't he just ask? Because he's afraid. Alina's expression softened. He knows what you went through at Silver Creek. He knows you're healing, not just your back, but everything else. He doesn't want to push. Doesn't want to be another wolf who takes something from you without asking. Words hit Marie like a physical blow. She had been so focused on her own fear, her own hesitation, that she hadn't considered what Alexander might be feeling. What it might cost him to hold back, to wait, to offer his presence without demanding anything in return. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted, her voice small. For any of it, the bond, the mating. She stopped, unable to put words to the fear that coiled in her chest. Being vulnerable again, Alina finished. The opening yourself to someone who could hurt you. Trusting that this time will be different. Marie nodded, her throat tight. Alina took her hand, her grip firm and warm. I can't tell you that it will be different. I can't promise that Alexander won't hurt you, not because he's cruel, but because loving someone always carries the risk of pain. But I can tell you this. I've watched Alexander for 5 years. I've seen him face rogues and rivals and wolves who wanted to tear this pack apart. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. His eyes stung. Alina, not saying you have to do anything, Alina continued, squeezing her hand. You're healing, you're allowed to take time. But I am saying that if you're waiting for a sign that it's safe to feel something, you might be waiting forever, because nothing worth having is ever completely safe. She stood, smoothing down her dress, and looked down at Marie with the fierce affection that had been there since they were children hiding turnips under tables. He's going to be at the Eastern Fields this afternoon. Training the new recruits. If you wanted to see them, the fields, I'm sure he wouldn't mind the company. She left before Marie could respond, disappearing into the pack house with a wave. Marie sat in the garden, her cold tea forgotten, and let herself feel the truth she had been running from since the moment she arrived at Dawnshadow. She wanted to see him. She wanted to be near him. She wanted to know if the spark she felt when their eyes met was real, or just the desperate grasping of a wolf who had been broken and was searching for something to hold on to. And maybe that was the answer. Maybe the only way to know was to stop hiding and start living. She rose from the bench, her back protesting with a familiar ache, and went to change into something suitable for a walk through the fields. The eastern fields of Dawnshadow stretched as far as Marie could see, a rolling sea of wild grass and late summer flowers that swayed in the afternoon breeze. The sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and in the distance, she could see the dark line of the forest where the territory ended and the wild lands began. She found Alexander at the edge of the training grounds, overseeing a group of young wolves who were running drills under the watchful eye of a grizzled warrior. He was dressed simply, leather trousers, a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no sign of the formal armor he had worn at the feast. He looked different like this, more real, more wolf. He saw her before she reached him. She saw the moment his gaze found her, the way his whole body stilled, the way something shifted in his expression, surprise and then pleasure and then something deeper that made her breath catch. He said something to the warrior beside him, then crossed the field toward her, his stride easy and unhurried. "I was hoping you'd come," he said when he reached her, and there was no pretense in his voice, no careful politeness, just honesty. Marie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Elena mentioned the fields were beautiful this time of year. They are. He fell into step beside her, matching his pace to hers. "But I don't think that's why you're here." She walked in silence for a moment, the grass brushing against her skirts, the scent of wildflowers filling her lungs. The bond hummed between them, a quiet vibration that she could feel in her bones, and she knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic, that he could feel it too. "Don't know why I'm here," she admitted finally. "I thought I did. I thought I came because I wanted to see the fields, because I needed to get out of the guest house, because—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "But that's not true. I came because I wanted to see you, and I don't know what to do with that." Alexander stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to face him, and found him watching her with an expression that was both open and guarded, a wolf who wanted to reach out but was afraid of being bitten. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said quietly. "You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to know what this is or what it means or where it's going. You've been through something that would have broken most wolves, Marie. You're allowed to just be." "What?" "Here." He gestured at the fields around them, at the sun sinking toward the horizon, at the space between them that felt charged with possibility. "Right now, in this moment, without worrying about tomorrow or next week or what anyone expects of you." Marie looked at him, really looked past the handsome features and the easy charm to the wolf beneath. She saw patience there, and kindness, and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. "Very understanding," she said, and she meant it as a compliment, but there was an edge to her voice, a challenge she hadn't intended. Alexander caught it. His lips quirked in a half-smile. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I say it like I'm trying to figure out if it's real." She took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "The wolves who wanted things from me, my status, my brother's favor, the power that comes with being connected to the throne, they were always understanding, at first, until they weren't." Smile faded from his face. "I'm not them." "I know." She did know. That was what frightened her. "That's the problem. I know you're not, and I don't know what to do with a wolf who wants nothing from me. I don't know how to trust that." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with something that might have been emotion. "I want things from you, Marie. I won't lie and say I don't." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and his fingers brushed against her hand. "I want to know you. Not the princess, not the Alpha King's sister, not the wolf who survived Silver Creek. You. The wolf who hides turnips under tables and laughs at her brother's jokes even when they're not funny and looks at the world like she's waiting for it to disappoint her." Marie's breath caught. "How do you know about the turnips?" "Elena." His smile returned, softer now. "She tells me things. She says I should know what I'm getting into." "What are you getting into?" He took her hand fully then, his fingers threading through hers, and the contact sent a shock of warmth through her entire body. The bond surged, a wave of something that was not quite emotion and not quite instinct, but something in between, a recognition, a claiming, a promise that was not yet spoken but was no less real for being unvoiced. "I don't know," he admitted. "And that's the truth. I don't know what this is or where it's going. But I know that I've been looking for something my whole life, and I didn't know what it was until I saw you walk into that hall 3 nights ago. And I know that I will wait, however long you need, whatever you need, because you are worth waiting for." Marie stared at him, her heart pounding, her hand warm in his. The wounds on her back ached with the echo of old pain. The memory of Liam's whip, the cold ground, the blood, it was there at the edges of her mind, whispering that she was a fool to trust again, that wolves always wanted something, that she would only be hurt again. But there was another voice, too, louder, stronger. The voice that had kept her standing when Liam struck her down, that had faced him in his cell and demanded the truth, that had walked out of Silver Creek with her head held high. "You survived," that voice said. "You are stronger than your fear. You are worthy of more than pain." She looked at Alexander, at his patient eyes and steady hands and the way he held her like she was something precious, not something to be taken. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready." but I'm tired of being afraid." She stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. She lifted her free hand, placing it against his chest, and felt him inhale sharply at her touch. "I don't know what this is," she continued, meeting his eyes, "but I want to find out, with you, if you'll have me." Alexander's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his chest where his heart pounded in a rhythm that matched her own. His eyes were bright, fierce, and there was something in them that made her feel like the most powerful wolf in the world. "Have you?" His voice was rough, unsteady. "Marie, I would wait 1,000 years for you. I would fight every wolf in every pack for you. I would." She stopped his words with her lips. It was not a gentle kiss. There was too much between them for gentleness, too much fear, too much hope, too many words that could not yet be spoken. It was a claiming and a surrender all at once, a question and an answer, a beginning that neither of them had expected but both had been waiting for. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the sun had sunk below the horizon and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. The bond between them blazed like a living thing, a thread of light that connected them, body and soul. "Together," Alexander said, echoing her words from the feast, and she knew he understood, knew that he had felt it too, the shift, the settling, the quiet certainty that something had changed between them that could never be undone. Marie leaned into him, letting his arms wrap around her, letting herself be held. Her back still ached. The scars were still healing. The fear was still there, waiting at the edges of her mind. But for the first time since Silver Creek, she felt something other than pain. She felt hope. She felt wanted. She felt, perhaps, that she was beginning to heal. "Together," she agreed, and in the gathering darkness of the eastern fields, with the scent of wildflowers in the air and the bond humming between them, she let herself believe that this time it would be different. Edward was waiting for her when she returned to the guest house. He sat in the garden, a glass of wine untouched at his elbow, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. He looked up as she entered, and she saw him take in her flushed cheeks, her slightly swollen lips, the way she moved like a wolf who had finally let herself breathe. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Alexander." It was not a question. Marie sat across from him, suddenly grateful for the warmth of the evening, the soft glow of the lanterns, the distance that had been put between her and the memory of Silver Creek. "Edward." "I'm not going to forbid it." His voice was calm, measured, but she could hear the tension beneath. "You're not a pup and I'm not your keeper, but I am your brother. And I need to know." He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "I need to know that you're not running from what happened, that you're not grasping at the first wolf who looks at you with kindness because you're afraid to be alone." Marie's first instinct was anger, a flash of heat that rose in her chest, demanding to be unleashed. But she pushed it down because he was not wrong. He was her brother and he was afraid, and he had earned the right to ask difficult questions. "I don't know if I'm running," she said honestly. "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if this is real or if I'm fooling myself because I want it to be real." She met his eyes. "But I know that when I'm with him, I don't feel like the wolf who fell in the dirt at Silver Creek. I feel like the wolf who got back up. And I think that's worth something." Edward studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes, the same blue as their father's, searching her face. Then slowly some of the tension drained from his shoulders. "He's a good wolf," Edward said quietly. "Alexander, I've made inquiries. His father served honorably. He's never taken a mate, never shown interest in the political games that wolves play for status and power. He chose to serve at the borders because he wanted to protect his pack, not because he wanted to advance his position." Marie blinked. "You've been investigating him." "The Alpha King. It's my job to know the wolves who get close to my family." There was no apology in his voice, but there was something softer beneath the formality. "I wasn't going to let another wolf hurt you, Marie. Not ever again." Words hit her harder than she expected. She reached across the table, taking his hand, and felt the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. This was the wolf who had carried her from the ceremonial ground, who had stood between her and Liam, who had spent 3 days watching her sleep to make sure she was safe. "You can't protect me from everything," she said gently. "And I don't want you to. I want to live, Edward. I want to feel things, even the things that might hurt." He squeezed her hand. "I know, he exhaled, something in his expression cracking. "When I saw you on that ground, when I saw the blood, I thought I'd lost you. I thought I'd been so focused on being the king, on the plan, on proving something about Liam's character that I forgot the most important thing. You're not a piece on a game board, Marie. You're my sister, and I almost failed you." Marie moved around the table, sitting beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, brother and sister, in the garden of the pack that had welcomed her when she needed it most. "You didn't fail me," she said finally. "You came for me." "You always come for me. I always will." His arm came around her, careful of her back, holding her close. "And if Alexander hurts you, you'll do what exactly? Threaten him, challenge him, start a war between Dawnshadow and the crown?" She smiled, despite herself. "Edward, I love you, but you need to let me live my own life." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, did you just say you love me?" "Said it before. You haven't said it since we left Silver Creek." She pulled back, looking at him. He was trying to be casual, but she saw the vulnerability beneath. The brother who had spent days watching her sleep, who had carried her when she couldn't walk, who had been terrified that he had lost her to a wolf's cruelty. "Love you," she said clearly. "I've always loved you, even when you're overbearing and protective and treat me like I'm made of glass, even when you make terrible plans that nearly get me killed." She paused, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "Especially then." Edward's laugh was rough, almost surprised. He pulled her back into his side, and she let him, sinking into the warmth of him, the familiarity of his presence. "I'm still going to watch Alexander," he said into her hair. "If he so much as looks at you wrong, you'll do nothing, because I am a grown wolf who can handle myself." She poked him in the ribs. "Besides, you liked him. I saw you talking to him last night. You were practically interviewing him for the position of wolf who gets to court my sister." "I was being polite. You were being terrifying. Marcus had to remind you that you were a guest in his pack, and threatening his beta's son was not appropriate diplomatic behavior." Edward grumbled something she didn't catch, and Marie laughed. A real laugh, full and free, the kind of laugh she hadn't thought she would ever find again. Above them, the stars were coming out, scattered across the sky like seeds of light. The garden smelled of night-blooming flowers and damp earth, and somewhere in the pack house, she could hear the faint strains of music, the distant laughter of wolves who had found their place in the world. Tomorrow, she would have to think about what came next. About the capital, about her place in Edward's court, about the wolf who was waiting for her at the edge of the fields. Tomorrow, she would face the questions she had been running from since Silver Creek. But tonight, she sat in the garden with her brother and let herself be loved. Let herself be held. Let herself begin at last to heal. And somewhere in the darkness, she felt the bond hum, a quiet, steady pulse that echoed the beat of her heart, and she knew that whatever came next, she would not face it alone. If you loved this story, please like and subscribe to this channel. Also indicate in the comment section if you want a part 2.